But until you have that dialogue, until you give them a chance to introduce themselves and to show you how they live, that, you know, maybe they use different names for God, or different rituals, or different something.
But even at this point, if Barack Obama had in fact been Muslim, though he was not and never had been, if he had been, he would not have been nominated, much less elected. And we can know that with a fair amount of confidence. In this country, at this time, a Muslim could not become president.
Which is wrong.
Which is absolutely wrong.
But it's this, we're waiting for society to grow up.
Yes.
Waiting
and it happens in fits and starts. It doesn't, you just go, boom, we're adults.
Well, and that's why we have the show, to encourage people to think in broader terms.
Yes, and to grow up.
Instead of thinking of Muslim only as a headline, get to know some. Make them your friends.
Exactly.
You know, get to know them as real people. You know, get to know some Jews, get to know some pagans, get to know real people, so that you understand, you know, you don't have to approve of anything, you don't have to agree with anything. Let them live their lives in the way that works for them. You know, that puts love and honesty and truth and harmony into their families and into their jobs, that puts quality into their work.
Well, just like more people personally know someone who is gay than are aware that they know someone who is gay, more people know someone who is pagan than are aware that they know someone who is pagan. And having known this person and worked with them or lived next door or whatever the context was, it suddenly then becomes known, oh, well, you're a fill in the blank, and you're still a nice person. And so it really doesn't matter, does it? Awareness.
Yeah. The idea that something about that would somehow force you to not be a nice person, of course, is totally absurd.
Absolutely.
But it brings us back to this issue of closets, which I have a lot of arguments with other gays and lesbians about, because there's a movie that came out recently, but hopefully it'll be available for many, many years, entitled Milk, telling the story of Harvey Milk. And within that movie, there are a few scenes where you see the conflict between his strategy of embracing truth and the contrasting strategy of playing politics. And they wanted to play politics, and he wouldn't have it. And in the end, his strategy worked and theirs didn't. And I would personally say it's still working out that way.
Yes.
People who want to play politics are still creating more losses than victories. And people who are willing to step forward and say, I am whatever, it is me. If you vote for this law, you vote against me.
Me personally.
That's still making the difference. And all through history, that's what has always made the difference. Somebody having the audacity to stand up and say, this is me, my name is, you know me, and this legislation may have a negative effect on me, or is needed in order to grant me the same freedoms you take for granted.
You have, yes.
The same things you take for granted. To remind us that what we're supposedly moving toward is a just and free nation without double standards.
For anyone, ever.
For anyone, across the board.
We are having the same conversation, and have been for years, in the pagan community about how out is...
Yes, come out of the broom closet.
Come out of the broom closet. How far out are you going to be?
Well, and I always hate it whenever somebody says, but it's a very personal matter.
Well...
and on one point I'd agree, but I'd say, but that's not the time you're living in.
Right.
You're living in a time where it's not only a personal matter, where this is something that costs people their jobs, their children, their homes, all sorts of horrible things that they really should not have happen to them.
Yes. Harassment.
All sorts of harassment.
In public.
Well, and when you're harassed, finding absolutely no support from anyone,
right.
Finding yourself isolated and marginalized. And that, going right to the core of what makes a person decent, to me is wrong.
Absolutely wrong, and it has been the truth of our culture for too long, and yet it is, in fact, changing. It is much easier in most places to be gay and or pagan than it used to be.
Oh, by a long shot. And it's interesting how many people living today don't remember what it was like even 30 years ago.
That's right. They don't know from Stonewall. They don't know what happened and when, what the context was, and how different it is now. Mm-hmm. And the same way with the pagan community, when you simply, that simply was not something you mentioned to anyone.
Well, and like that scene in the movie Milk, I loved it, where he basically confronted his team with everyone needs to come out, and just dumped it right out in front of the room. Who here is not out to their parents? And the guy confessed that he wasn't, and he handed him the telephone. And he said, "Well, I don't really want to have this conversation
on a phone.
What, in front of everybody?"
Wow.
And so he turns to the guy next to him and said, "Find him a room in this building with a phone where he can talk in private with his parents." You know, and he just said, "You have to do this."
And it's true, and it's for the common good, but it's also for your personal welfare. Mm-hmm. They cannot persecute you for something that is a secret. Well, if it's not a secret.
The more we don't talk about things, the more there's this tendency to think of them as taboo.
Yeah, if you don't want to talk about it, there must be something wrong with it.
Well, or when somebody says, "Are you a pagan?" And you respond, "Well, yeah."
When they say, "Are you a pagan?" I will say yes. When they say, "Are you a witch?" that's a whole nother issue, and I will ask them to define the term. Mm-hmm. And if they say witch means Satan-worshipping baby killer, then the answer to that is no. No, if that's the definition of witch you're using, no, I'm not one of those.